Rick Smith, Howard Solomon. Everybody could rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We start tonight with public participation and recognition. This is the public comment. Members of the public who wish to speak to the board should complete a request card prior to the meeting. This section of the meeting will be reserved for comments from the public. All comments should be limited to 3 minutes, and criticism of individuals is not in order. Okay, so we have Megan Jackson, and she's going to speak on emotional social services.
Good evening, and thank you for the time to speak. Tonight as a group, we are here to address the board about the need for more social and emotional support workers. We are both parents of children in the district, as well as a few of us have the opportunity to work with these students inside the school. Each of these have been affected in some way by what happens inside the school. Tonight, we hope to share just a small glimpse of that. First of all, I can offer you the view not only of a parent of 3 children at Founders, but also the building substitute. I am lucky enough to get to know just a little bit about each student. We have some really great children. As a parent, my oldest child has experienced 2 years of extremely difficult classrooms. She has her own set of challenges she has to overcome, but yet has had to deal with 2 years of extreme stress. Just this past year, we had to start her on anxiety medications to help her manage. This is to no fault of the teachers or administration. I've seen them work diligently to counsel, teach, break up fights when students in crisis can't regulate themselves, and selflessly work to figure out other ways they can help. I was hired as a building substitute at the beginning of the school year. I thought after 5 years of being active on the PTO, I had a good idea of what happens and occurs during the school day, but I was terribly wrong. My first 2 weeks alone, I was hit, kicked, nearly bit multiple times, and swore at with words that would make a sailor blush. I've checked lockers and followed children that have left a classroom, as well as cleaned up thrown papers and books. Last week, I witnessed a child in full crisis, and it was heartbreaking. And other parents that are here with me have had their children evacuated from their classrooms. When we are fully staffed, we barely have enough help to de-escalate one child. If we happen to get 2 or more children enter into crisis mode, there's simply not enough qualified help. During the last board meeting, there were a few that brought up good old-fashioned discipline or just getting rid of them. The dynamics of our student population is so much more than lack of discipline. To many of them, school is their safe place. It is a known fact that children tend to act up most when the places where they feel the safest. So what does that tell us? It tells us that we may need to meet needs that are not met at home. We need to let our children know that they are not disposable and we will not give up on them. For many parents, there just may simply not be enough time in the day to take them to the counselor after they experience any type of trauma. And what does this boil down to? We need the help. As parents and employees of the district, we all have been personally affected by these situations. Someone stated at the last board meeting, the cost of doing nothing is great. By continuing to ignore the problem in front of us, by blaming others, we will continue to pour out individuals into society without the necessary social skills to thrive. We also continue to expose new students to trauma on a daily basis when a child in crisis throws a chair, hits and bites, or destroys a classroom. We risk losing fantastic teachers that may just grow weary of the daily stress of dealing with multiple students that simply don't have the tools that need to focus. We know that finances and budgets are important. However, in light of the current events in Florida and being an NIU alumni that should have been on campus 10 years ago, the cost of doing nothing is great. If we can provide the social and emotional support early on, we can hopefully curb the trend of increased violence and break the cycles that so many of our families are stuck in. We owe it to our children, we owe it to our teachers, and we owe it to our community.
Thank you. Next, we have Mary Lynn Buckner, elementary student trauma.
Hi, good evening. I'm Mary Liz Buckner. I work at Littleton Elementary. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about what the these look like in the students. We're going to see graphs and pictures. I've been teaching in the county since 1987, and I feel like if I were in the classroom every day, I might not realize what's going on either. I randomly interviewed 2 teachers that I work with at Littleton, and I said, can you just tell me some of the things that your kids go through on a daily basis? We're just kind of go down this list. So for one student, DCFS has been called multiple times due to abuse by an older sibling. Another student is in foster care with an abusive background. Another student was abandoned by a parent. This is all one classroom. The other parent has been incarcerated. Another student has sensory processing disorder, is easily distressed and needs a place to calm themselves down. Another student has been sexually abused. Another one with a parent incarcerated. Another one has been abandoned by one parent after being severely abused. Another student whose parent died this year. This person, the parent had a stroke in front of the child. Another student where the dad is not allowed to see the student or the siblings. Another student was replaced from the home, removed from the home and placed with grandma. Another student not enrolled in school at all for the first 100 days and just started in the beginning of February. Another student exposed to abuse, lived at safe passage, father passed away, not enrolled in school until almost 7 years of age. Another teacher I interviewed. One of her students moved in the middle of the year and has suffered extreme trauma. This person rocks and cries in fetal position. Another of her students moved back mid-year. This is their 5th elementary school. The parent is also incarcerated. Another student who appears depressed is mentioned hurting themselves, cries daily, and won't participate with peers. Another student who was new this year was labeled as educational ADHD, has lived with an aunt for a time, then grandpa, and back and forth to mom. This is the student's 5th town and 5th school, and is stressed and suffers from anxiety, cries, runs away, and cannot perform everyday tasks. Needs constant support and supervision. Another student has to take care of a toddler brother when they have no daycare and misses school. Another student has a new baby crib in their room so that they can handle the nighttime feedings. So basically, these are children who live in extreme trauma and stress in their home lives. They don't have the tools to maturity to handle these feelings, so these feelings are manifested in some of the following ways that we've seen at Littleton. Aggressiveness towards others, crying and screaming in class, inattention and inability to focus on tasks, running away, hiding, ripping papers, crying in the bathroom, refusing to work with partners, interrupting class, crying and rocking, spinning in their chairs, refusing to go to groups. And I'm just telling you this because I feel like, I've been teaching since the 80s. I didn't see this stuff back in the 80s. And seeing it now, a lot has changed. If I wasn't walking in this classroom every single day, seeing with these kids, I might not understand it either. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Thank you. Thank you.
Next, we have William Anderson, and he'd like to speak on Cyber Predators Awareness Program.
Thank you, ma'am. Board, the reason why I'm coming up to this is it's personal on my behalf. I have a daughter that has been targeted by cyber predators. And reason why I'm going through this is this has been going on for over a month, trying to get not only these people out of my daughter's life, but also the emotional trauma that she has put herself through. Sorry. I want to spearhead a program. Nothing's worse than having a ticked off veteran. Okay? And my daughter's my world. And I know everybody's parent, their kid is their center. What got me really ticked off, excuse me, not to you guys, I want to get a program to get started so we can get an awareness. I'm sorry. But not only with the students, but also with the parents. Because one thing I learned, and I'm making a negative out of a positive, is I didn't see the signs. I didn't see the signs because I still pictured my daughter as that cute, pure sugar little girl that I love. And I didn't see the signs. And it went very much beyond almost to what happened. If you guys watched the news last night, 11-year-old was abducted. That person that abducted her is from Hoffman Estates. I went and did the research. That son of a gun is less than 50 miles from this very spot. He went to all the way down south to go and do what he wanted to do. When I went and turned in my daughter's electronic devices, I counted 4 cyber predators already on there. 3 were out of state, 1 was local, 1 was out of this country. That's where I draw a line here. Because I want to help the community, and then I want to grow. I want to take it to the top. And I want to help my school out first, help my community, help our kids, help our parents, and help our teachers to have a great understanding on this. This is something brand new to me. Like the lady before me that said that this stuff never happened in the 80s. I grew up on Commodore computers. Okay? And this thing is such a shocker to me. They not only take the innocence away from our kids before they even have physical control of them. And that's where the social workers do a lot of work. I'm not saying I'm no expert. But I want to spearhead a program. I will be the lead. I will take the responsibility. And all I need is some help. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Next, we have Dr. Christine Robelli O'Brien. She'd like to speak on the hiring of SEL support staff and social workers.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm here today of my own accord as both a parent of a young child in the district at Lincoln School from first graders for other capacity, and also as a local taxpayer, longtime taxpayer in this community. And I'm here to ask you to vote in favor of adding these social workers, these certified staff positions, to all the schools across this district. I'm a product of a high school here in Dekalb in the 80s. Things are different, and they're different from 5 years ago. And it's time that we start to take a look at it. And I speak to you not only as a parent, but as a former educator. You have been presented with the evidence, with the numbers, with the need for these positions, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the parents, first of all, whose children are subjected daily to the disruption and, yes, violence in the classroom committed by other children. We parents know about chairs being thrown, about smart boards being ripped off the walls and thrown, about teachers taking physical abuse at the hands of children, and whose hands are tied. They have to stop their work to take care of the child who's causing the disruption, leaving the other children to flounder. We also know that children as young as 5 and 6 are committing these assaults, and yes, they are considered assaults in my book at least. I recognize that you want to be fiscally responsible to your taxpayers, and as one of those taxpayers, I respectfully ask you to spend wisely our tax dollars to protect our schools, those who work in them and those who attend them. I also stand before you as a former educator, as I mentioned, who taught at NIU during 2008 when the shooter came to campus. One of my students was in the classroom in Cole Hall. He stayed in my classroom the rest of the semester as I helped him and guided him. And yes, he did all of his homework the rest of that term because it helped him. They gave him a focus. Now, these were adults I was working with, but they're also considered children. They were 18. I see what trauma does. As a professor, I also was subjected to violence by students who were considered adults 2021. I am 5'2". I've had a 6'8" student intimidate me, come into my face, threaten me because he didn't want to turn a paper in. Luckily, I was able to talk him down, but that was just one of only the numerous incidents that happened. And the school I went to was able to reveal some of his records, and it turned out he had been committing these kinds of acts since kindergarten. So it's there. The pattern is there. If we don't start now by working with these children, by bringing in certified staff positions, we are creating a snowball effect. And I'm not talking about using false logic, faulty rhetoric here. I'm not interested in, as a parent, hearing some roundabout rhetoric meaning, oh, well, the parents will take care of it. The parents can't take care of it. They're busy. They've got other problems going on. It is the parents' job to help, but when you have your teachers there with the children during the day, committing these acts in your schools, these schools belong to all of us in the community, we are looking at a totally different situation. And I think that as a board, as a community, You have the power to change this trajectory and really make a difference for these children, as well as the parents here, future kids who are going to hopefully stay in our community if they can get the help they need, and most of all, protect those of us. Your fiscal responsibility to this community is not separate from this request to add certified physicians. It is part and parcel of taking care of our students. And you have this power to make these dramatic changes that will protect all of us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we have board committee reports and correspondence. Anybody have anything? Okay. You good? Okay. All right, then we'll move on to presentations. Freshman English Humanities, The Hate You Give. And this is an informational item. Dr. Vicki Tuscan, Ray Best, and Mr. Maurice McDavid.
Good evening. First, let me do a matter of introductions. This is Maurice McDavid, Dean at Dekalb High School. Colleen Solomon, freshman English Humanities teacher, and Brad Vest, who's instructional coach at the high school. The purpose of our presentation tonight is to tell you about a book that the English Humanities classes will begin reading later this spring, The Hate You Give. Thanks, perfect. Jamie had requested that we come here tonight, and not for approval of the book, but the purpose is to share the context of the book, the preparation that has gone into the actual teaching of the book, and the rationale as to why we feel so strongly that this book needs to be introduced into the freshman humanities, English humanities curriculum. At the conclusion of this board meeting, Jamie's going to be giving each one of you a copy of the book for you to read, and then we'll come back in a couple weeks, and any concerns or questions that you have for us about this book will be what we'll welcome in terms of dialogue, discussion, and questions. So we're going to begin actually with Maurice, and he's going to give you an overview and context of the book.
So I think one of the first things for us to understand about the Hate You Give and how it's going to roll out for this year is that it will only be read amongst our freshman English Humanities classes. That is 4 classes, totaling around 100 students total. These are students who are coming typically from being struggling readers, who have not typically engaged in a lot of reading. So I think that this book is going to provide that engagement. Basically, I'll give you kind of a brief summary without giving too much away. This book surrounds a young lady and kind of her journey to find her voice. It does involve kind of her presence in 2 different worlds, not in a literal sense, but really being in 2 different communities and who she is in each of those communities. And again, I think we'll do an excellent job of engaging students who maybe have some similar experiences. I think some of the central themes that you'll find in this book are themes that we have always tried to hit in our humanities program. You'll find themes such as identity, and again, this character will really look to try to figure out who she is. Also, a second theme is the idea of finding voice, trying to find out who she is, and then also how to speak from that person, having a voice in her community, surrounding communities as well. And then I think a third theme, which is really significant for our freshman students to understand, is the intended message versus the perceived message. And again, that's a book theme that you'll find throughout this book as this student journeys and speaks and attempts to find her voice and what people hear versus what she's saying and what her intentions are. I will say that this book directly ties in, and I think, again, to give you some context, one of the reasons this book will engage students is it ties in with some recent events. We talk a lot about, it's certainly a national conversation, the concept of gun violence, some of these different things. These are things that some of these students have perhaps had very personal experiences with. And so I think that, again, this book is going to be a way for them to engage in learning and be able to pull some of that information out.
And before we talk about curricular design, you heard Maurice say community. One of the things that Colleen Solomon is quite gifted at is creating a viable, a valuable, and truly an achieving community in her classroom. She teaches at-risk freshmen as well as regular freshmen, and you wouldn't know the difference when you walk into her classroom. And so one of the big things she's done in preparation of this book, that's what she does naturally. She builds community. But in addition to that, she's quite an innovative teacher. She puts a lot of thought into everything she teaches, be it from Mockingbird or Odyssey or a variety of short stories. She's brought that same intentionality to this work, if not even more so. She has worked with curriculum specialists. She has worked with the administration. She's worked with instructional coaches. She's worked with her department, and she's reached out beyond our school. She's talked to teachers that are actively teaching this book. She's even spoken with the author as well. She's put a lot of time, effort, and more importantly, care into how this book will be taught. She's worked on some front-loading activities that will actually be taught by various members of the social justice Dekalb, who will come in and help further that community. As Maurice touched on, there are some very personal topics in this book, and Colleen has constructed this in a way that will allow the students to explore this safely and grow from perhaps their past traumas we spoke about earlier, and into a very, very meaningful classroom experience.
So the rationale, you're probably asking yourselves, why this book? There's really three reasons. First and foremost, this represents the best of young adult literature that's out there today. In the materials that we sent through the board packet, I included hyperlinks to two of the most recent book reviews, one by the New York Times, one by the Atlantic. I'm a former language arts teacher. Rarely do you see young adult literature receive the kinds of accolades that this book is receiving. It is the best of young adult literature. And we seek for all of our students to provide in their hands the best that we can find that really allows them to dig in and explore the themes that we've addressed today. It's also won numerous awards and continues to win numerous awards, both through American Library Association, most recently the Fred Scott King Award, but also, again, something that we don't see very often, it's long listed for the National Book Award. That is kind of the granddaddy of all book awards. And so as a young adult literature book, this is receiving top accolades and acknowledgement from across the country. So we're really putting in the hands of our students some of the very best of young adult literature. Second, the students really will see themselves through this book. One of the key areas that Dr. Adams and Dr. Combs addressed to us is relay the needs for the needs assessment for the diversity plan is all of our students to see more of themselves in the literature that we provide and put in their hands. I can tell you at this date, at the elementary level and at the middle school level, language arts teachers are actively seeking out and discovering multicultural, multiracial literature that's being put into the hands of our students. This book represents the same kind of effort with the same kind of careful thought and planning that Colleen and her partner teacher have exhibited as they've prepared for this book. It's relevant, it's current, the key things of identity and finding voice resonates in every young adolescent as they're trying to find their way through the world, particularly for the main character who's central to this book. And then just to reiterate something that Brad just said earlier, the third reason is the two right teachers are teaching this book. Not all teachers in the district are ready to tackle some of the tough topics that you're going to read in books like this. But Colleen and Elise both have created a culture and an environment in their classroom where they're already having these conversations. They've already set a climate for dialogue and communication to look at issues like race, like community, like identity, like finding voice. They've created a community and a real trust and respect that really sets them apart. So it's the right book, it is at the right time, but it's especially being taught by the right people to really allow for a really powerful learning experience. So we really come before you tonight. This is just for information at Jamie's request. We're not asking for any action from the board, but we are inviting you to read this book. We have copies for each of you. And then we will be willing to come back in 2 weeks to have conversations with you about this book. During the next 2 weeks, please feel free to email me. If you have any questions, call me. Stop by my office here at the corner. And at any point at any time, the hope is then after the following board meeting, we have a letter that we've already prepared that will go out to parents. It will explain what the book is about. Parents will have the option of whether to keep their student in or to opt out. We also plan to have a parent forum one night. This is all before spring break. Any concerns or any dialogue that parents would want to have. And then the hope is then to start reading the book then after spring break.
I assume Mrs. Collins is very entertaining. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to hear.
I have some questions.
Sorry, go ahead.
If I could?
Yeah.
Okay, so what's the regular procedure for approving a new book?
What we did, you mean in terms of novels
Not any
like this?
curriculum book, not novels, math books, whatever, right? And anything that comes in the classroom, at least as I understood it in the past, goes through a curriculum review and then it's approved after it's been reviewed for the classroom.
So,
So how does that go then?
so for example, for a book like this,
Any book. Is
All right.
this book any different than any other book as far as our policy of curriculum review?
Not all literature, not all pieces of literature that's used in the district
Our review?
are reviewed by curriculum committee or.
Are all math books reviewed, for instance? No. That's news to me. All right.
however, in the case of this particular book, Colleen, why don't you kind of describe what the process that we went through with this book?
Well, in the summer, I was contacted by a friend of mine who was on the social justice retreat at NIU. And she said, you know, she gave me a list of 3 or 4 books and she's like, you have to read all these. And I read all the ones that she sent me, and of all of them, they were all great. They all had merit and they were wonderful. This one spoke the clearest to me. And right away, I finished it in 2 days and I emailed Vicki and I said, I need to teach this, if it's okay. You know, not that it's me. But you know, I really, she wanted it. I really wanted to teach it. And, you know, so we kind of got the ball rolling back in July, and we've done curriculum days, where we met. I read the book, and my co-teacher also read it. Elise, she's not here tonight, but she's the special education teacher that is my co-teacher for the day for all 4 classes. And she agreed as well, and we met starting this summer, and then throughout the school year, we've been meeting and planning with, as Brad mentioned and Bruce mentioned, Vicki, administration, social justice league, outside resources, and just meeting with everyone to try and make this a great experience for the students, and again, to increase that engagement as well.
Since it's being brought up in front of us, I'd like to ask a question. So what do you want to have your students take away from this book?
From this novel, it's a very similar theme to another novel we read by Sherman Alexie, where the character in Sherman Alexie's novel, which we read second quarter, he's torn. Like, who is he? Is he Junior or is he Arnold? Because on the reservation, he's Junior, but at the school that he transfers to, he's Arnold. And can he be both Junior and Arnold, or does one have to win over the other? And it's very similar in this novel, where Star, she lives one place but goes to a private school that's about an hour away in the suburbs. So am I Star who lives in Garden Heights, or am I Star who goes to Williamsburg? And can I be both? And that whole idea of what students struggle with. Can I find my voice? Do I have a voice? As a child, as a teenager, am I allowed to have a voice? And it's just kind of working with all of that high school students struggle with on a daily basis, that identity piece and voice piece.
But there's a huge plot vehicle in here about a cop shooting an unarmed friend first. What do you hope to have them take away from that?
Like just in general? I mean, it's definitely part of the plot, and it's something
Seems to be the key aspect, or a key aspect of it.
It's, you know what, it seems like that because that's what it says on the flap. That's the first part, but that event happens very, very early in the book, within the first chapters. And the book is actually about that whole idea of finding her voice. And Star says, you know, if something like this were to ever happen, I thought I'd have the loudest voice and I'd be, you know, shouting from the rooftops, but I'm silent and I have no voice. And that whole idea of can I, find that voice? And can I, do that?
Something else, our students with trauma are struggling with is the idea of resiliency.
Mhm.
And along with finding her voice, one of the things that Star really builds over the course of the novel is resiliency. And it's one of the keys to overcome trauma, as you've heard from any of the numerous social, emotional presentations. And so we're really using this also to be able to help our students build that resiliency for some of the traumatic events. I mean, you heard Mary Lynn talk about the students who have a parent incarcerated, a parent passed away. It's coming out of a traumatic situation and then finding yourself and staying strong.
So that's what you hope to have them take out of that particular reading, is that resilience, resistance to trauma, resistance, and finding a voice.
I think you'll find through almost the read, and while that event kind of kicks off the book, things like the trial, the numbers, that is actually like third or fourth. I mean, it is very down the list of events that are happening with Star. That's really the big thing for us to get to know and engage Star.
Great, thank you so much.
So several different people mentioned during the presentation about diversity, Dr. Coleman Adams and so on. Okay, so we don't have a plan. We're nowhere close to having a plan as far as I can tell. Last Social Justice Committee meeting was canceled. I don't know why. I haven't been to any. Howard, I wish Howard were here because he could speak to it, because I think he's been to some. So I'm a little worried about this, depends when you do it, getting ahead of our presentation to the community of a diversity plan. This certainly, it sounds, I mean, I'm looking forward to reading it. It certainly sounds like it addresses a lot of the issues that we'll be addressing, or the group will be addressing in our formulation of a plan. So I'm a little concerned about that, and I'm wondering I don't know where we are with that, Jamie.
If I may address
Yeah,
those two
sure.
concerns first. Last month's Social Justice Committee meeting wasn't canceled. Maybe you just didn't get the notice that they had met, because that was early February.
Well,
He's talking about the diversity plan.
Oh, the
And
plan.
that was canceled because there was, the majority of the people couldn't make it.
Just couldn't make a meeting.
Unless there are other
Okay.
As far as, are we getting ahead of ourselves by introducing literature like this before we have the actual plan, is what I sense was your other concern?
Yes.
So I mentioned earlier that over the last year and a half, language arts teachers at the elementary, middle, and high school level have been looking for ways to infuse multicultural, multiracial literature into the curriculum, even before we started having discussions about a diversity plan, because as teachers, they recognized that the students within their classrooms were becoming increasingly diverse. And as a growing number of us, and I'll include myself along with that group, who had the opportunity to go through the training through Northern Illinois University's social justice camp, we're being equipped with tools and resources. And as teachers feel comfortable and empowered, bringing some of these materials into the classroom. The diversity plan will be an all-encompassing plan that will include additional training and professional development for more teachers to feel empowered to bring about materials like this into the classroom, along with what Colleen and her partner teacher already do beautifully, having those conversations, those honest conversations and discussions within the classroom. But as far as diversity being brought into the classroom, that started a while ago, and it will continue as more and more teachers immerse themselves in the literature that's being made available to our students.
Can I would just say, I think that with or without a plan, we understand what research is telling us today is good teaching, right? And so I think to that end, we understand that this focus on diversity and multiculturalism, particularly in the literature. And I will just tell you, as someone having come to the Dekalb School District and having minimal exposure to that literature, right, until I was able to get to college, we understand that today it simply is being taught in our universities to our incoming teachers, right, that this is simply best practice. So I think that there is a piece of that, the plan's gonna come, and I'm really looking forward to that. But I think even without that plan, we understand that we are moving towards the concept of what's best practice.
And to reiterate, kind of what David said, it isn't new. Years back, actually with Jen's help as well, I developed and then taught a class, and then Colleen taught it as well, about contemporary fiction, narratives, and diversity. One of the reasons that class went away is because teachers like Colleen started to infuse that literature in our regular courses. Sherman Alexie is a key textual class that you now see are teaching the same author. English next one.
I don't want to be into censoring anything, and I'm looking forward to reading the book. I understand and agree pretty much with what you all just said. One of the things I thought of right away when I first looked at the presentation online this last week was the auditorium event that went off the rails. Apparently, I wasn't there, but the backlash was felt community-wide, and that's kind of what drives my thinking or my concern about something like this, which will. I think is parallel to what I think I saw or heard about, read about a lot of those kids in the community or in the auditorium event. I think we're trying to find a voice, and you're talking about doing that, right? And the reason, in my view at least, and I don't know if everyone else in the community agrees with this, but the reason that event was a problem was because there wasn't any preparation, and people weren't quite ready to handle what happened as a result of what was said or done in the following discussions and so on.
If I may, that's why there's some very elaborate steps that are built into this. The lead-up activities, a lot of lead-up discussion, everything from an opportunity with the parent meeting for those who choose to come. We're reading this book at the board level, at the administration level, and because making sure that we don't just jump in, we're working into this. These are discussions that we need to start having.
Oh, absolutely.
And I appreciate all the thought and preparation that's gone in behind this. And part of the reason that we're here tonight talking about a book, because again, you asked, is every book, is a textbook, does every book go in front of the board? No. This book's coming in front of the board because of the potential impact that this is going to have on our students. And I wanted the board to know that this is a courageous step that we're taking. And I also wanted the board to know the steps that are, and all of the pre-planning that are going into this.
May I I'd like to just also piggyback on that, because I was in the midst of all that a couple of years ago at the high school. So I know to what you're speaking with. But that, along with, and if you do some investigating online about the book, a few districts are going to pop up where there was some controversy. In every instance, and I will include what happened in the auditorium 2 years ago, things were presented in a vacuum. There was nothing put in place with that presentation, nor in 2 districts that ran into trouble with this book because it was presented in a vacuum. In other words, there was no opportunity for the dialogue. There was no opportunity for those conversations. In the context, what happened in the auditorium, there was no follow-up discussion that was facilitated. In other words, there was a presentation, but there was nothing that was processed after the fact. In the 2 districts, I'm being very transparent now, that have run into some bumps. The reason why they ran into bumps is, one, they weren't transparent like we're being here tonight, or how we'll be transparent with the parents. We had a couple of teachers at the middle school level. This is not appropriate for middle school. This is very appropriate for high school, who decided to just kind of try it out with a group of 7th graders. And of course, people got very upset. And 3, there was no venue and there wasn't no forethought in terms of how will the types of conversation discussion that Colleen has embedded in her curriculum that will help facilitate the kinds of discussions about what we're having here tonight.
Mr. Watt, I think the other thing that's for really any assembly that community building piece, there's a reason the book's been taught in 3/4 to me. Colleen knows her students, more importantly, her students know her. She's a teacher that anybody would probably have teach their kids, and she's the one taking that direction. She really is.
Yeah, it all sounds good. I just wish our diversity plan was further along. I think it would be helpful to the parents. In fact, at that event, that auditorium event, I recall reading how the kids, although things got kind of out of hand for a bit, the kids seemed to get together and work on it and figure it out, right? That doesn't mean the parents did though, right? And that's one reason why I would very much like to have a diversity plan in place and a policy that the board has agreed to when something like this starts to happen. Otherwise, the kids are going to be out in front of the parents and perhaps some staff, some community members and so on. It's something to think about. I think you're doing a great job with what you presented tonight. I'm looking forward to reading the book. I don't know whether I like it or not, but there was a lot of books in my day that were similar to this. Some I liked and some I didn't. That's all right. But I just want to be prepared. I mean, I think we have to.
That's why we're.
So Marion, to your point, my 16-year-old foster daughter had Miss Sullivan, and I can tell you that she left her class in journalism with a whole different perspective. She's even talking about college. So what I can tell you is that you do have a teacher, and I speak to your point, who understands the various aspects. I understand that you're not questioning it, but I am telling you that there has been a well thought out plan. They're not just throwing something and expecting and hoping for the best. These are individuals who know and understand trauma, who understand what our district needs. So I think questioning that is great, but also understand that this has been thought out very well and planned at the same time.
Proof will be in the pudding, right? When it happens,
Thank
we'll
you
see.
so much for the great presentation.
Yeah, part of the process too.
I would just like to see maybe too, once we go through this process, some of your students to come back and give us feedback to the
Oh, yeah, that's a
board.
great idea.
One more thing.
About how the whole thing
Hey,
went,
hey,
how we
hey,
changed
hey.
and so
I had an idea.
on.
So like the kids that are gonna read this are the struggling ones that you were saying, right? Why don't you have some of the kids that are just, doing fantastically well, have them read it too?
Oh, that's in the works.
Okay.
Yeah, please go ahead. We can get some feedback from the students. I think that'd be great.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Next, we have Dekalb Custodial 428 financial projections, and this is an informational item.
Good evening, everybody. It's that time of the year. It seems like it's always that time of the year. We talk about money and financial projections, but what this is specifically, what we look at here are long-term financial projections. We somewhat focus on the next couple of years, but we do take a 5-year outlook as well and take a look at the direction that we're headed. So in terms of our projections, how this gets developed, what we use is a tool called FiveCast. It used to be PMA's financial forecast model, and they've kind of spun off into this other area that's a lot more flexible in terms of looking at our long-term projections, and it gives us the power to do that rather than they do that on our behalf. We use that tool and we can modify our projections as we go using a web-based model. So it helps us develop a multi-year financial plan. We can run a myriad of different scenarios and what is analysis pretty much on the fly. Within the tool is our detailed budget and some performance analysis. We use this to do our budget preparation, and we do upload what we have in Skyward, which is our accounting management software, right into this program, which makes it pretty seamless for us. And it's a good place to do the budget distribution and then do some stakeholder reporting as well. So what data elements that are used in order to run through this FiveCast performance model is 5 years of audited financial statements of our revenues, expenses, and balances, fund balances. We have our current fiscal year 18 budget, as well as detailed general ledger data. We have our tax levy, our extensions, and our rates historically, and then it also produces some future, what the future looks like there. Our equalized assessed valuation, which is an important number that drives our local revenue. Enrollment numbers, we developed some district assumptions, and in the last couple of FFAC meetings that we had back in December, and just recently in January, we went through those assumptions so that it's not just the business office that's looking at those assumptions, it's also the FFAC meeting as well. So we will get all those assumptions and determine what the best ones to use within the model.
I have a question. You take into assumptions on state issues as well?
Oh, yes.
Where in there is the state aspect, say for instance, that pension thing that's upcoming or?
Yeah, that comes in, that comes in later. Okay. Yeah, that's part of the whole, all the assumptions.
So that doesn't fit into this part, but it fits in like
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So here's just a quick look of our enrollment history, and as you can see, we have increased enrollment over the last 10 years or so. From 2008 to the fiscal year 17-18, right now we're at about 635 students more than we were 10 years ago. And it's interesting because we do see some districts that are to the east of us are actually the other way around. So, and I think even some of the districts within DeKalb County, they're seeing more decreases in enrollment, we're seeing increases. And here is our, just a simple pie chart in terms of what our revenues look like from the different various sources where we get revenue. We get it from this, local sources, which are primarily our property taxes. So that's about 60% of our revenue. And this is operating revenues, our day-to-day revenues. Our federal sources are about 5.1 million. Primary source of that is our Title grants, Title I, Title II grants, as well as our National School Lunch Program, the reimbursement we receive from the federal government there, and then also Medicaid funding. And then the next biggest piece after local sources is our state sources. And the big chunk of that is our general state aid, or formerly general state aid, which is now called the evidence-based funding formula. And then we also have some state funded grants, special education reimbursement, and transportation reimbursement. So that's the makeup of our operating revenue. A big determination of our local revenue, our tax-based assumptions, and a part of that is the consumer price index, because that is used to calculate our tax levy. So you can see here a history of what that consumer price index has been since basically 2005, and you can see it's been pretty much all over the place. Most recently, for the last two published years, or the calendar years, it was 2.1%. It was 2.1% as of the end of 2016. As well as at the end of 2017. And how that affects our budget, if you look at the 17-18 year, which is what we're in now, the CPI that we used to calculate what our levy was going to be for 17-18 was for the 2015 published year. So we are in arrears on that by the time it gets to the tax levy. And here is when we look at those that CPI, what we're looking at projecting. So you can see in 17 and 18 was at 2.10%, which is an actual number. The projected that we have in the assumption model is about 1.8%. So somewhat conservative based on recent numbers, but again, if you look at the average, that's about what it looks like. So that's what we're using for the next 5 years in our projection model. Another big component of our local revenue is our the change in our existing EAV. That's just basically the properties that are here without the new construction. So you can see what that change has been. We had some decreases back in 2013, 2014, even prior to that. We leveled out in 2015, and we have about a 6.14% in 2016. 2017, we're estimating about 3.6%. We still don't have those final numbers yet. We'll see those in March or April. And we're projecting a fairly conservative number of about 1%. We're hoping you'll be more than that, but for the model, we want to stay conservative. So we're at 1% increase in existing EAV. The next big piece, which actually generates additional dollars for the district, is new growth. And this is basically new construction. You can see that from in 2012, 6.7 million, and then up to 2016, 6.6 million, what the construction number looked like. We're estimating, or the assessor's estimating, about 12.5 million for the 2017 tax levy year. In the projection model, we have a base of about 2.5 million, although you can see a couple of spikes there. In 2019, we have the Dekalb, one of the DeKalb TIFs expiring, so there's additional dollars from that. As well, in 2022, we've got the big TIF that expires. So that's why you see that huge increase.
These are projected.
Yes.
2018, the TIF, or 2019, the TIF, one TIF, yeah. And then that very large TIF in 21, is it?
22, yes.
That's making the assumption that they don't instate another TIF.
Yes, right? And what the city's looking at now is taking the central area TIF, that large one. Actually, it's a little piece of the TIF 2 and the central area TIF. Right. And then just doing the downtown area. So carving that piece out. So
this is taken into consideration. I mean, that 57% there, that takes into consideration discussions that we've had with Dekalb about what they project to any TIF districts, or what they're thinking about possibly doing for another TIF district?
Not right now, it does not. because we don't know what that looks like in terms of the total numbers. So in terms of what they're carving out to put within that central area.
I just asked as far as what we're projecting. I mean, in a sense, it's hypothetical because we don't know what kind of tips they're going to reinstate.
But it's going to be quite small. It's much smaller than what these tips look like.
But that 57 million is with the old TIP district coming off.
I understand.
If they reinstate a new TIP district, it's going to freeze the current EAVs where they're at.
Okay.
So even if you go back to 2020, 2021, that would include properties that are currently not in the TIF district that are on our tax rolls now. So we get the old TIF coming off, we see the $57 million of new construction, it's considered new construction to us. And then if they concurrently put a new TIF district in, it's just going to freeze those current properties at their current properties at their rate today.
So it won't affect that 57?
No.
It won't affect that?
No.
No, because it is what we're getting is the increment.
Right.
So basically that's the increase in the value of those properties from when it was put
I
on.
think I understand
Yeah.
a little bit.
What we won't get is any increase in assessed value in the new TIF district. So we'll be frozen at whatever, let's say hypothetically, they put it in 2020 or 22, and they'll freeze whatever the current assessed value is of those properties at that time.
So that wouldn't show up on this graph, it would show up on the EAB graph, is that correct? Or it would show up on, it would be then reduced as far as?
Well, the 57 million of the TIF district that's going to expire, that will show as new construction. Any new TIF district is simply frozen at that level for us.
We just don't get the increment above when it gets frozen.
Right.
That's the part that basically goes to the city, or the
Thank you
EAV
for
goes to
clearing
the
that up.
city. Yeah.
These two have been extended already, haven't they?
The,
Existing.
yes.
Okay, so
Well,
they can't
actually,
extend
TIF 2, I don't believe has them, but definitely the central area.
Really? Okay,
Yeah.
so they could extend that theoretically.
But
There's no plan to do that. They really want to, they're looking really just targeting the downtown area. It just really that strip. And not really going, too far.
Downtown in an enterprise zone or not?
A piece of it is, not all of it. Mhm. Yeah, just a small portion of it.
You're talking about that science or that center where the card for the old,
The STEM program you're looking at?
yeah, that STEM program.
It may be, I'm not exactly sure if that's in the enterprise zone, but there is a piece of it that is in the enterprise zone. Mhm.
If you, well, I don't want to get into that. If you do the one, you don't do the other.
Yeah, you can't do both. I think the TIF goes for, if I remember.
Sorry to get
No,
off
no,
the
that's
weeds.
No, that's fine, because that's important, because once that comes on as new property, that's when we can access those dollars above the tax cap.
So that's an example of
Seems like
enterprise zone,
something-
right? We're not locked out if they do an enterprise zone, right? Whereas if they do a TIF, we only get the increment after the length of the TIF.
Right. So the enterprise zone is primarily, depending on the type of company, is a tax abatement if they qualify, as well as they qualify for sales tax. Like if they're doing renovations or new construction, they qualify for some sales tax rebates. So that doesn't affect us necessarily, but it helps them to fund their project.
So the impact on the school district is different.
Yes.
From one instrument versus the
Oh,
other.
yeah, it's a completely different, yeah.
The enterprise zone is, I would say, less impactful because it's typically a 5-year, it is a 5-year program. And once the 5 years is over, then the full EAV comes onto the tax roll. And it's 90, 80, 70, 75, increments. But again, it's a 5-year program instead of 23.
Plus extension.
Another part of the tax-based assumptions is the total equalized assessed value. So this just gives you a quick history of where we've been with our equalized assessed value for the district. In 2012, we were about 696 million. We see that dip. And the dip in the decrease in the EAV, it took a while for it to hit us, or even Dekalb County. But things started in 2008 is really when the bottom fell out. We really didn't see those decreases starting until a couple of years later. So you can see we've pretty much got to the bottom back in 2014, and now we've been going up a little bit, so those market values are going up for properties with a little bit of new construction is going on. In 2017, the estimate from the assessor is about 700 million. And again, with the assumptions that we have in there with the new construction as well as the change in existing EAV, but that's the projected EAV that we're looking at for the next.
What do they use to project it, Cindy? What basis do they have? Sales assessment or
You mean the
permits? Or how do they make a projection, but what are the factors that they include in making the projection?
Honestly, it's an educated guess.
Okay.
No, it really is. I mean, you're just looking at a trend, and then you decide what, as when we talked about it at FFAC, and I know you've been there as well, we don't want to be too aggressive. So we basically just look at it from a conservative perspective.
I mean, if you look at the real estate prices, some of them have gone up fairly well, but then again, sales, I don't know.
Right.
FFAC, they might, get some info from
And again,
realtors.
we have a couple realtors, and I think they just feel as well, let's just stay conservative at this point. And then, if anything, that what the EAV does for the district is it helps to keep that tax rate down or decrease that tax rate.
Also, have you talked at all with the chief assessment for the county officer for the county regarding whether they're going in and reviewing some properties that they're going to lose, it would appear, that they're going to lose at least one or two assessors as a result of charges. They already lost the Dekalb assessor, and there's a new one in there now. Okay, so it looks to me like there will be, or could be at least, potential for some changes. Aside from the run-of-the-mill every year challenges to your assessment and so on, it looks to me like there might be some structural change if they proceed, try to follow that kind of path. There's a lot of factors that are changing, so not just economic, but local political and economic development factors. So I'm wondering if when PMA did this, if they would fold in any of those kinds of things or not.
It's kind of difficult to do that because it's kind of hard to
speculative.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can speculate and run all sorts of different scenarios.
Yeah, but it's also speculative for interest.
That's presentation. We can speculate.
FFAC won't have to deal with it.
Yeah, FFAC can speculate on it.
So again, this is for all DeKalb County school districts, so it's kind of nice to see a comparison as to what's happening in the entire county for all the school districts. And it just so happens all of the school districts in DeKalb County are unit districts, meaning that they're kindergarten to 12th grade. So it's a good comparison. And as you can see, everybody has experienced those decreases over the years and are now starting to tick up a little, some a little bit faster than others. But again, we're all basically in the same boat when it comes to what has happened with our equalized assessed value. So some revenue assumptions for other local revenue, a big chunk of revenue, well, about 1.1 million. We also received for corporate personal property replacement tax. That comes from the, basically it's a tax on corporations within our area, and we get a piece of that. So what's in the projections is about 1.1 million, which is what is projected by the Illinois Department of Revenue, and we're keeping that consistent. Interest income, we're actually at 1%, which is pretty awesome. We were basically down to nothing. So we actually have been earning some pretty decent interest, investment interest over the last year or two. Tax financing, TIP surplus. This goes back to the city of DeKalb TIP that we do have. We do have a surplus that we get on an annual basis. Not just our district, but also all the taxing bodies also get the surplus as well. And that was done when it was extended, the central area TIP, when it got extended, the surplus was started. We have 1.4 million in our 18 budget, and we're also estimating the same for the next 5 years. And again, that central area TIP expires in 2021, and so that final surplus we would get it would be in fiscal year 2022. And then all other local revenues again are just projected as flat at this point. I'm not going to go a lot in detail because this is kind of repetitive in terms of what I put into the budget, but just to remind you all of the new state school funding formula. And it ties the evidence-based practices that research has shown to enhance student achievement based on a prototype school that they basically created. Each district is looked at differently based on their adequacy targets. New dollars are supposed to go to the neediest districts that are farther away from adequacy. And the whole point was that no district would lose money during this process. So everybody would get basically a whole harmless amount.
What does adequacy define? What does that mean?
It means how far, based on the prototypical school. They basically have put together, and it's a pretty extensive spreadsheet. Actually, on Friday, I'll be at a workshop where they're actually going to work through every single one of these pieces, so we all know how it's being calculated. And it's really saying, okay, for grades, let's say K to 3, you should have X number of FTE based on the number of kids you have in your classroom. And they go through all the different core investments, is what they call it. And then you run all these numbers based on your enrollment and where your kids are in certain grades. And it comes up saying that, okay, based on the numbers of kids you have that are regular ed students, special ed students, low income, ELL population, how much funding you should have to support that core investment. And then they calculate how, based on the local funding you're getting, which is primarily from the real estate taxes and property taxes, how far away you are from funding that on the local level, and the state is supposed to fill that gap. So,
And how are we? Where are we?
well,
on that
right now,
gap?
we're at about 59%, according to early calculations, which puts us in tier 1, meaning that, so we want to be at 100%. And so we're, according to early calculations, we're at about 59% actually.
Pardon me, why do we want to be 100%? What is the benefit of being 100%?
So you can adequately fund your educational programs.
So, but aren't you in dire straits when you get to 100%?
No, 100% means that you have enough funding to fund all the needs of your
We
students.
do the right number of people, we have the right number of
Yes.
people dealing with the right number of things?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're at 59%, correct?
Yes.
So if you define adequacy as the core investments, the ones that the prototypical school says you should have.
Yeah.
Right? And 100% means that you have all those core investments?
Based on that model.
Is it an inverse relationship though? I mean, if you are not adequate, if you don't have all the core investments, then you get more money.
Right,
Yeah,
I guess
right?
you can, I mean, I guess it depends on, how you want to define or from what perspective it is, but 100% adequate means that you have enough funding to fund your core investments of your kids based on your population of students.
Are many people at that level?
Well, it depends, yeah, there are. I mean, you
Yeah.
have your North Shore districts and.
Locally? I mean, DeKalb County or any
Um,
county?
I would have to look, I'm not really sure, to be honest with you, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Are you going to give us a report when you come back from this meeting? I
Oh,
would
yeah.
really love to hear.
Well, I would love to
what they
learn more
tell
about it,
us.
because we really don't know a lot yet, because the state's still working on it, so, yeah. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, so here we, basically the new formula is replaces general state aid, and what, in order to come up with our base funding minimum hold harmless amount, what they did is they combined all the funds that you see there, general state aid, special ed reimbursement, and the others, what we received last year, and we're basically getting that $22.8 million this year for the evidence-based funding. So they combined a bunch of different state funding sources and brought those all together, because all these pieces are part of that prototypical school. And we have been receiving that 22.8 million. We get it twice a month. That is something that they've been getting consistently, not like our state categorical payments, which have been late, although we did just receive our first quarter payment this last week.
So they're not prorating now?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yes.
No prorations.
Is this the 22 that we were talking about earlier? Is this have anything to
Yes.
do with the 22 million that we were talking about earlier?
Yes.
So this is the breakup, or this is the makeup of that 22 million,
Right.
right?
Right. But right now, it's all, that's how it used to look in fiscal 17. In fiscal 18, now it's just one big number, which incorporates those different fundings that they've had previously.
Seems less clear. This is clear.
It actually makes it clearer.
It does?
Yeah, it really does.
Fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Someone other than me.
And what's good about this number too is in, over the last few years, general state aid was the funding that they were doing consistently, and that wasn't late. They may have been prorating it, but we were receiving it twice a month, like we should, rather than waiting 6 months after a fiscal year to receive it. So the fact that we're getting more than that is helping our cash flow. We're getting our money more consistently because it is helping us better.
Was it 90% last time?
Actually, 100%. We received 100% in fiscal 17. And again, really, I won't go through a lot of this. I talked about it. The big thing here is that we're still waiting on fiscal year 18 allocations. We really, the state's still working on those calculations. Hopefully we'll know more on Friday. The last that we have heard is that the estimates will be available in April and they will start dispersing the funds then. Supposedly, I'll let the controller know that is the plan. So hopefully we will see those numbers soon. Early estimates that we could receive about 1.9 million just for fiscal year 18. We do not have that in the budget at this point. So that's not confirmed, but that's what our hopes are. And again, like I mentioned, we don't have that within the budget. And when we look at this, at the model, that hasn't been included in the budget for any fiscal year until we really see what that is. So just to be conservative. And this I put in here just as a reminder for our general state aid, what we have lost due to that proration and what we were entitled based on our calculations and what we did actually receive starting in 2011, 2012 through 16, 17. So we technically have lost about $7 million because they did not fund general state aid 100%.
Does that graph tell us that we were getting more?
No, less.
I mean, before, but in.
Not necessarily more than before, because we have received more. It's just based on the calculation. We received that much less. If they would have funded it at 100%, we would have $7.1 million poured out.
Right.
Really, that's.
There's no plan to ever catch district office.
No, no.
Is there anybody downstate?
No,
Is there anybody still downstate? We can,
Like,
I'm just.
good luck.
Yeah.
I
I don't think
will
anybody's.
be, I will be happy if they fund 100% of our evidence-based fund and pay us our category. Honestly, I think a lot of districts will be as well. So revenue assumptions, state revenue, again, the other state categoricals, we're projecting to remain flat at current year levels. And just a reminder that we didn't recognize 2.1 million in state categorical reimbursement payments for 16-17 because we did not receive them in time for when we had our audit done, so we remained conservative and did not post those. Typically, we would post them because we're on an accrual basis, but we did not. We did receive all that funding. And we are going to recognize that revenue in 17-18. So when we move forward, I'll show you what that looks like for our current budget.
So you put it into 17.
Yeah.
So we're going to see twice last year's and this year's in this fiscal year.
We've only
Yeah.
seen one payment so far.
Well, I've only seen one of the current year. So it kind of depends on what they do this year.
Yeah.
Yeah. And federal revenue, again, we're just keeping that at a projected level. So you can see on the revenue side, we want to remain conservative. We keep things very flat, unless we know for sure something's going to happen. Revenue sensitivity, this is kind of helpful to kind of just give you an idea of what a change in any of these numbers would look like. So 1% change up or down in CPI could garner the district 492,000 more or less. And then any new property or that new construction, so every $1 million we see, we can get more or less of about $71,000. So just give you some perspective of what that looks like. And evidence, our state evidence-based funding, unknown at this point. So, and again, once you see this formula, with the general state aid, it was somewhat a little simpler to figure out what that number is. Now that, you know, how this adequacy looks and how they're going to fund it over time to get to 100%, we just don't know what the future is going to look like with that. How long is it going to take us to get from 59% to 100%? Really just not too sure.
Is the assignment of tiers based on adequacy going to be based on everyone against everyone else? It's completely comparative.
No, it's every district separate.
It is.
Yes.
Against the prototypical. Then.
Yes.
Okay, so we don't have to wait then for. Okay, that's what.
No, if they look at every district individually, come up with that number, see what the total is, then they have to figure out how to fund it. Yeah.
We were talking about FTEs in relation to this adequacy, bringing the adequacy up.
Mm-hmm.
So there's expense involved in bringing that from, what did you say, 59% currently, up to even approximating 100, right? And there's going to be FTEs involved, there's going to be positions, moving people around.
It depends. That's one of the things that we're not real clear about. So let's just say, yeah, you get 1.9 million, but you need to get to this level. But again, getting to 100% is going to take time. So I mean, we know that we're not gonna be able to do that all in 1 year. So it's gonna be interesting to see what sort of, like for that 1.9 million, let's say, what do we have to do or to prove in order to substantiate those dollars?
Here's an example. If they say that a prototypical, the best scenario K-3 program is a 1 to 22 teacher ratio, and they say, we're gonna give you X amount of dollars, and they're gonna come back in 2 years and say, you know, we gave that money to you because we wanted you to decrease your K-3 class sizes. And if you just ignore it and say, well, we're going to spend it over here on this, then the state may come back and say, we're not giving you any more money because we gave it to you to reduce your class sizes and you didn't do it. So you don't really need the money.
It would seem silly to get the money before you reduce the class sizes if you're betting on spec that you are going to be able to do that.
There will be strings attached to this.
Yeah, I would think.
Because they're not just going to turn the money over to us and say, to us, the school districts, and have it go unchecked.
I would think.
And there'll be more reporting requirements as well. You know, one of those is site-based expenditure. Right now, when we report to the state, we just report our annual financial report for the district as a whole. Now there's going to be additional reporting by each location and by each building, and report expenditures more detailed.
Sounds like a lot more people.
Yes, we're preparing for it. I mean, we're somewhat there in certain areas, but there's other areas, let's say transportation. We really just put that all in together. We don't break it out by building. We're going to be forced to do that. So we're just going to have to do some due diligence and accounting more straight.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, so then after we put all these assumptions within our funding model, this is basically what our baseline projections look like for our operating revenue. And again, you can see it's broken out by property taxes and other local revenues. So we have it broken out by local, state, and federal. So you can see basically that we see some increases in property taxes because of the assumptions that are in there. Most everything else is flat. So you can see that basically projecting out what that looks like. And again, I will go back to the adjusted budget. What's in that adjusted budget is our original budget, plus I added the 2.1 million that we received from the prior fiscal year.
Which is a one-time deal.
That is a one-time deal. Yep. So now we'll talk about expenditures. This is our pie chart for expenditures for our fiscal 18 budget, about $84 million in operating expenditures. And as you can see, the largest of those expenditures is salary and benefits, which is about just shy of 75% of those. So again, some assumptions that we use for our expenditures is for salaries, we based it on our employee contracts that we currently have. A lot of those contracts are tied to CPI plus a PERPA, like a few cent hour increase as well, so that's included in there. What the teacher contract looks like as well, which is a 2.12% base salary increase. And then we also have $200,000 for potential lane changes. That's teachers moving over with their salary based on their credit hours, whether they have a bachelor's with 3 hours, 6 hours, and if they were a master's. Health benefits, we have a 5% annual increase in the model at this point. For our calendar year 2018, our premium increase was about 7.7%. And again, a 1% change in that gives us about $78,000 more or less in terms of our total health benefits. Purchase services, supplies, capital outlay, we tie a lot of those to CPI. We look historically at certain line items to see if we need to increase or decrease. Special education tuition, we have about 5.5% increase in there, and transportation contract about 3.5%. The teacher or certified staffing assumptions, right now within the model, we have 8 additional teaching staff for each year that are included in the model. When we put them in the model, we have to place them in a certain spot on an average. So we put them at a VA6 step 5, which equates to about $67,900 for each new FTE with salaries and benefits. Also within the model, we take into consideration the teachers that are retiring. So this is the number of teachers that we have known at this point that will be retiring. Obviously, you can see in 2020, we have a big group of teachers retiring, so that makes a difference in terms of what that next year looks like for salaries. because we're bringing in new teachers and obviously at a lower rate than the teachers that are retiring. So here's our baseline projections for our operating expenditures. Again, most of the larger increases you can see are in those salaries and benefits in the first couple years. And then if you look at fiscal year 2021, that rate sees somewhat of a flattening. That's because of those retirees and those replacement of salaries with lower salary people instead of the higher salary people that are going off the books. And then again, the rest of the purchase services, supplies, and materials, and what those increases look like over time as well. And when we summarize everything here, and just remembering, because the big parameters are the FTE number, is those 8 teachers that come in every year, as well as no additional state funding from the evidence-based funding model. So you can see I have our final audited numbers here, so it kind of gives you the starting point. Then we have our total revenue, total expenditures, and what our surplus or deficit looks like each of those years moving forward. And then also beginning fund balance, ending fund balance, and then also that percent of expenditures to fund balance. Or actually fund balance as a percent of expenditures. In our policy, we like to say between 15 to 25% of expenditures. So you can see our adjusted budget, when we include that 2.1 million from the previous fiscal year, we're actually at a surplus. And we are trending pretty close to what our budget is at this point. So that is a $1.2 million surplus for this upcoming year. And that again does make the assumption that we're going to receive all the categorical. So we'll just have to wait and see how that looks. And so basically, if we're looking at, let's say, the 18-19 fiscal year, we're looking at a deficit of about 860. And then you can see going forward, it gets a little larger. Although it's really hard to look too far out. Looking 5 years out, it's a little tough just because there's just so many unknowns. But again, without that evidence-based funding included in here as well. And this is just a spreadsheet that shows the history since 2012, what our operating revenues and expenditures are, and the history of our surpluses and deficit. And this also incorporates our adjusted budget and what our projections look like up through 2023. And here basically is that same spreadsheet, but in a picture format, so you can see the revenues in the blue, the expenditures in the somewhat red, maroon, and then that red line is our fund balance and how we've trended over the last few years. So we've kept that somewhat flat and trying to keep it so it doesn't fall below that 0 line. So some additional considerations and assumptions. Again, we're still looking to see what that evidence-based funding is going to look like. This also assumes that there's no change in the property tax calculation. There had been talk out there of freezing the property taxes. So that's something that's not incorporated, but something we could run a scenario on. All known tax abatements are included. We do have one that's rolling off and one that's just starting this year, that 3M. So that's incorporated in here as well. The possible state TRS pension obligations being transferred to the district. That's something that just got talked about by our governor. That's a scary number, I'll be perfectly honest. What he said in his the budget address is to put that in at increments of 25% each year. So like first year 25%, the next year 50%, and 4 years, at fourth year then the local districts would be on the for the whole 100%. Cumulatively for our district, that would be about $10 million. And that's just our district. So the possibility that's happening, I think, is somewhat remote, just because that's a lot of money just for our district, and the all districts would be in the same boat. But maybe something less than this, it's really hard to tell. So on the front end, the governor's addressed that they're going to fund schools, a little increase that funding, and then in the next breath saying, we need to spend more on the pension. So it'll be interesting to see how that.
When our auditor was here last time, didn't he say we have an unfunded obligation by $295 million? Do you remember that number?
I'd have to look in our capper to check it out.
It was a couple $1 million a year or something. I'm trying to remember these numbers, but yeah, part of this situation.
Yeah, it's just to basically cover that unfunded obligation.
So that's 500 under the proposed, or under at least the possible increase in pension. That's 500 per year up to 2 million.
It's actually, the 25% is about 960,000 for us. Then we basically add that, 50% would be 2 million, and then 75%. You get to the end, because based on the current normal cost, it's about $4 million for our district. So that's basically paying 4 million by the end of year 4.
So that's gonna show up, that 4 million is gonna show up in 4 years, is that correct? So
If
then
this went through,
If it goes through,
potentially, yes.
and we'll have 4 million that we're not currently planning on to add to that.
Right now, that's not in the baseline projection.
And it shouldn't be. And keep in mind, we have districts right now that are starting to get into tax anticipation warrants because they don't have cash flow to finish out their year.
Right.
And there's multiple
Nearby.
of those. Well, there's multiple of those districts around the state. If this shift were to happen, I don't know how those districts, all of those districts around the state, even stay open.
Well, we'd be in the same.
Because
boat.
they're already doing that in tax.
We've got 10 million sitting in that fund, out of the 21 million right now.
Right,
And you can see the curve a couple slides back, heading downward. It'll be at 4 million, by 2023 without that 10 in there.
Well, there was, a couple of years ago, when the state was struggling to pass a budget, and there was fear that no school funding was going to flow at all. There was a statewide spreadsheet of school districts and how long they could stay open. There were probably, and I'd have to go back and look, but it was around at least a half that would shut their doors in December.
Wouldn't be able to open.
So when you talk about this kind of cost shift, knowing that there are school districts across the state that are in those dire straits, I can't ever see it coming out in this form because there's so many school districts that can't absorb it.
Right.
There's just not without. Now I'm not suggesting this. Not without a local levy like we have for IMRF or Social Security. And I know I'm just saying.
I know.
I know.
what
And
you're saying.
then the taxpayers are going, we can't afford that either. So I don't have the answer, but I'm just saying, the facts are, we had school districts that said, we couldn't keep our doors open until December. We have school districts across the state that are borrowing money into next year's taxes to get through this year. So this kind of cost shift would break so many districts. I can't see it coming out in the form that it's currently proposed.
Well, and just even financially.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
really,
Well,
you're bankrupting districts.
Yeah, I mean, it could be such an.
Where will the money come from right off? In the long run, right, or the short run, really, it's the unfunded obligation, and those pensions won't be paid unless loans are provided to provide that obligation. Or the levy locally, or in some way, something's raised somewhere, right? But the economies aren't there to do it. I mean, the development
And
has to.
remember, the districts have been doing everything they're obligated to do.
Yeah.
We pay into TRF. There's a portion that's an employer portion. We've done our due diligence. We pay when we're supposed to pay. And it's the state that has basically dropped the ball over the last number of years and has not funded those pensions. We've done everything at all school districts. Now they're basically in the position they're in because they shifted those funds.
Well, the first income tax hike some years ago now was supposed to solve part of the drought. But
Well,
of course,
then they're repealed it now. We're gonna use.
yeah, great.
Okay, so again, the district's bond rating was confirmed during our recent debt restructuring, so that's good news based on when we look. That's why it's so important to do these projections, because we do have an idea what's going on. We can kind of head off some of those things that may be happening. And then again, just for the state of Illinois Comptroller's website, the backlog of bills is about 9 billion, which I think this time last year was about 14 billion. So I guess that's good news. And then again, we did receive our first payment. So I want to put some good news out there.
We're to say they borrowed money in order to pay.
Yeah, they did. But so we did receive that money. But because of the way we do our, again, I want to mention our property taxes and how we defer those, it does give us cash flow. It does help our cash flow, because when we're looking at our fund balance as of the end of our fiscal year, that is the lowest point for us. Meaning that we're expensing all those expenses for salaries that are going to be paid in the summer that were from the previous fiscal year, on top of also saying any of those dollars that we received in May and June for property taxes, we're earmarking those for the next fiscal year. So for us, that is our lowest point. For a lot of districts, that would be their high point because they're doing it differently. So we do take that conservative approach so we can respond appropriately.
That helps great. That helps a lot with the cash flow. But if you look at the trend, we're still in trouble.
But we've done well.
In the long run.
I mean, considering that, we didn't get $7 million.
Yeah, it could be much more.
Yes, it could be much worse, but I think honestly, we've done a really good job of staying conservative.
Oh, that's why we're still solving.
And that's it.
Any other questions?
Okay, way back to the earlier slides, that's okay, you don't need to put the slide up, but the assumption for interest rate was like 1.4.
1%.
Was it 1%?
Mm-hmm.
And the CPI was 1.4.
2.1, well, 1.8%.
1.8, that's what I'm thinking.
Yes.
I've been following the Fed and commenters on what the Fed will do and how many interest rates we'll actually see. So they're being very conservative, it looks like.
Yeah.
Based on what I'm reading.
Yes. And actually, I like to stay conservative with that interest income number because it really, I'd rather wait and see what it looks like until it would actually happen. So we're always a little delayed in terms of that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Next, we have social learning in District 428, and this is a discussion informational item.
Okay, while we're pulling it up, I want to do some quick introductions. For our brief presentation today, I have with me Dr. Lisa Becker, who you met before. She's our school psychologist in the district, and then Heather Smith and Jen Katofsky, who are social workers in our district as well. So the purpose of our presentation tonight is really just to provide a very brief update based on questions that came up at our last board presentation to kind of follow up on that and provide an update. This is a collaborative effort both from the curriculum and instruction departments and the student service departments. And during our last presentation, really we were focusing on sharing some information about what is social emotional learning, why is it important, as well as some of our data for what our current needs are and what the trends we've seen across time for our district. And generally we're seeing a pattern where our social emotional needs are greater than our current mental health resources to meet those needs. So the majority of the time, our mental health resources are spending really addressing those tier 3 or those most intensive needs with much less time available to support all the other social emotional needs and learning that need to occur in our district. So then we came up with a recommendation, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that tonight as well. So the first thing I want to kind of share with you again to provide some context are some of the demographic changes that we've experienced in our district over the past 10 years. So you can see that we do have an enrollment increase over the past 10 years. These are data that were pulled for the Illinois report card. So the last data available are 2017. So we've increased at least 650 students. And then we also see a significant change in the number of our students who meet criteria that would indicate they come from a low-income background. So we kind of 10 years ago had about 34.5% of our students meeting that criteria, and then most recently we had about almost 60% of our students meeting that criteria. So that's a change in over 1,800 students who have those experiences that might be related to being a low-income family or being a part of that family and come to our schools from that background. So Lisa's going to talk with us, one more slide here. Another change we've seen then is a change in our special education numbers. So this is the number of students who haven't shown enough need to be eligible for an IEP. This is across kind of all different eligibilities. And we see an increase there as well over the past 6 years. So the current, this is the most recent numbers here, of 156 students. So seeing those changes, it's also important to note, though, that our mental health resources have been relatively stable in the past 10 years. So we see kind of changes in some of the need here, demographic need, but relative stability in our resources. So I'm going to turn it over now to Lisa, who's going to talk a little bit about kind of what the impact is of some of those numbers, what that might mean.
Thanks, Amy. What I'm doing is just providing a little bit of context for those numbers so we can understand them a little bit better. A question came up at the last board meeting, and I talked a little bit about this diathesis stress model, and I just wanted to discuss that a little bit more. So for all of us, when we feel stressed, we have certain levels of resiliency. And so that's true for kids that live in low-income households, that's true for kids who live in middle-income households and high-income households. Kids and adults, quite frankly, that are very resilient to stress, and we also have kids and adults that they're not very resilient. It takes a little bit to trigger them. That's true across all of those different income groups, race, gender, etc. What we find, though, is for kids who are living in poverty, that their daily stress level is different than what it might look like for a kid that's living in middle or high income. So, for example, if you're living in a lower income home, it could be things like you might have a different babysitter different days of the week. Right? We all know childcare is very expensive. So you might have grandma watching you a couple days a week. You might have aunt watching you a couple days a week, and maybe neighbor the next day. Maybe you have some food insecurity. You do get 3 meals a day, but the fridge is generally empty. We're not sure where the food is coming from. And so what we find is kiddos coming from lower income households, when they come to school, even our kids who are very resilient, their kind of baseline of what they've had to experience before they come to our doors is higher. And so even though we might have, and we do have lots of very resilient kids that are living in poverty, it's going to take them a lower level trigger to have some impact. So when the teacher comes into the classroom and says, Valerie, where's your homework? For those very resilient and not very resilient middle and high income kids, it rolls off their back. Maybe there's a little anxiety shuffling through paper. But for our kids that are living in lower income households, because they've already had a lot of that stress, that might be all that it takes to trigger some of the difficulties that some of our other some of the parents go through. So we pair that with some of the research that came from the Centers of Disease Control. That's called the Adverse Childhood Experience Survey, or ACEs. And so what the CDC, this is kind of a national research study, looks at is how many of these adverse childhood experiences people experience before the age of 18, and how that's linked to outcomes later in life. And what they found is, and I'll define what some of those ACEs are, but for every one of these adverse childhood experiences you have a direct increase of poor outcomes as an adult, so things like substance abuse, not graduating, and it's actually linked to earlier death because of health problems and so on. And so those ACEs are things like physical, sexual, emotional abuse, neglect, having a parent that's incarcerated, having someone in the family that has a substance abuse problem. And so what they're finding is that most people, about 65% of people, experience one of those before the age 18, and about 35% have experienced 2. And so what that means for our kiddos is that, for example, in our elementary classrooms, we have about 10 or 11 kids that can have about 2 ACEs.
65% that you were saying, 65% experience these ACEs?
Yes.
65% of us in this room?
Yes. Yeah.
So it includes divorce. 35% of what
have 2 or more.
Have 2 or more.
Yes, have 2 or more. And so it's like divorce was one of them, like
that's irrespective of income.
Irrespective of income. It's just it's something that happened, an adverse experience they happened to you before the age of 18.
One.
If you think about the divorce rate, that
That's 50%.
Yeah. So if, like I said, if we think about people who have 2 or more, for our kids, it's about 10 or 11 per 20. So what that means is that we have a lot of kiddos in our classrooms that have a pretty critical need for some stable level of mental health support. And what we're proposing is that we really want to move from that urgent care level of service to a primary care physician service. So I'm going to use a little bit of an analogy here. If I had diabetes and I'm using the urgent care service, that might mean that I'm going to the hospital ER, let's say twice a month, and maybe physician's immediate care another time a month. When that person sees me, they're using evidence-based practices, they're caring for me, they're fixing my immediate problem, but they have no idea what my history of my blood sugar is, what the history of my medications, all the different my medications are. I don't have a trust level with this person, and I'm certainly not preventing my diabetes or my insulin to spike another week. So it starts to become a pretty costly cycle. Of course, we compare that to the primary care physician model, which is really that preventative model, right? So they're coordinating care between my different specialists. We have a history of what my blood sugar looked like. We're being preventative with different insulin levels, so we're avoiding those hospital visits. And so that's really what we're looking at with our mental health team right now, is that right now we're kind of functioning at that urgent care service. We're meeting kids when they're right at that crisis, but we're not really doing that preventative model. So that's what we're looking to do.
And so as you saw last meeting, this is our recommendation for increasing the mental health support so that we can provide more consistent supports and social emotional learning opportunities for all of our students. So that kind of breaks down kind of the recommended allocations. What we'd like to talk a little bit more about is what would that look like, right? So what would increased social workers do for our students? How would that help us shift from really kind of responding just at a reactive mode to being preventative and helping all of our students with their social emotional needs? So Jen and Heather are going to talk a little bit more about that.
So this is our social emotional triangle. It absolutely mirrors what our academic triangle looks like in terms of the supports that we provide our students at all levels of academics and those that are struggling. So it looks exactly the same as the other side of the triangle. When we start first at the green part of the triangle, that's our tier 1 level of support. That support is essentially provided to all students in all buildings at all levels. We're looking at the mental health staff working either collaboratively with teachers to put together a curriculum, or they might be co-teaching or going into the classroom independently to teach those students the social emotional learning that they need to be able to, at some point, independently initiate a coping strategy when they're struggling or they're dealing with an ACE or something coming from the home environment.
I have a question.
Sure.
Is this social emotional systems as projected by if you were to fill those positions that you were talking about before?
Yes. If we have that support in place,
if you had those numbers, this would be what it looks like.
This would be our most effective way of supporting all of our students in their social emotional learning. Absolutely, yes.
In a moment, we'll talk to you about what it looks like currently, and again, relating it to what it will look like if we're able to fill that.
Yeah. So
because
what it would look like first and what it currently looks like, we're going to show.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Again, at that tier 1 level, social workers, everybody would just be able to kind of support even building-wide initiatives for behavioral interventions, really looking at being proactive in supporting the social emotional learning of students. Then when we look at the yellow portion of the triangle, or our tier 2 level of supports, in addition to whatever students are getting at the tier 1 level, we're looking at our more at-risk students that might require some outside of the classroom, small group level supports to address those social emotional needs. We might be working as building teams to try and find some supports for those kids, making sure that we're addressing all of the at-risk concerns that they might be having, and again, trying to be proactive and providing them that support so that they can start to develop some of those strategies and become independent as they're working through school. For those kids that, the tier 1 level of support or tier 2 level of support still isn't quite enough, then we move into the red part of the triangle where we're supporting our tier 3 level students, or our most concerning social emotional students, the students that are maybe have all that other support and aren't being successful. They need more consistent maybe counseling, whether it be with the counselor or the social worker. They might be receiving supports and strategies through a behavior plan. We do some individual problem solving as a team. And we're really looking at this level too of doing some wraparound services where we're working directly with families and community agencies. So not only are they getting social emotional support within the school system, but then they're working with a counselor or therapist outside of school to also support. So we're kind of working in conjunction with each other.
Okay, so let's talk about what it looks like currently. Currently, on the left side of the screen, it talks about the reactive support to students with intensive needs. So I am an elementary social worker that currently supports 2 buildings. I'm assigned to 2 buildings in the district. And just to give you a quick example, Friday of last week, I got to school and it was about 8:30. I was on the phone with a social worker from another school in our district who needed some support for a situation she was dealing with. Get a knock on my door, and there was a student that was outside that wouldn't come in. So I assisted the principal, left the building. We eventually got him in. That was about 45 minutes later. Then started my day, went back to my, was going back to my office, and then a teacher approached me and there was a student in the hallway breaking down. Went to go assist that student. That took about another half hour. Then went back to my office, getting ready, pulled a group of students to start giving direct service to. Got a phone call from my other building, a very intense situation. They asked me to come over, so I drop everything, run to the other building. Again, which is completely part of my job, but it's what I'm outlining to you is how reactive we have to be right now and how stretched we can be. And so I went over to that building happily, but that took another hour and a half, 2 hours travel time and everything else. That student had a real high level of need. Came back to my building, got there about 12:30, 1 o'clock, and started my day, and then had a couple other crises that I had to intervene with. Just a quick snapshot. So again, when I say reactive, that's one of the examples I'm talking about on what it's looking like currently. And then we have those 2 or 3 level of supports for general education students. Some of those students that are not on my caseload, that do not have IEP minutes, that need my support because they're having a reaction, tantrum, outburst, whatever that might be. And then the next responsibility I have is providing direct services for students with IEPs and 504s. That's currently where we're at. That's where we're functioning. We're functioning in that very urgent care model like you talked about, Dr. Brown. On the other side, the more effective approach, the more proactive approach, of course, would be our ability to provide more direct services to general education students, that preventative model, to go into classrooms, collaborate with teachers, to provide those in-class lessons. You may have heard of Second Step before. It's a program we've used for many, many years, evidence-based. That years ago, we used to, when we had the time, we'd go in with teachers and collaborate with them and get them on the way to be able to teach that themselves. Then we could step out, but we could continue through the classroom, which is very supportive. Connecting students and families to community resources. That's a huge part of our responsibility as a social worker, which also helps us to continue to align families with that mental support so that we can, again, be proactive. And then finally, providing more consistent support to all students, which is the overall goal. But it's very difficult to do when we're in a reactive state right now. Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
So you outlined your day where you were dealing with crisis situation. Person wouldn't come into school. You had somebody who was having a breakdown, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Under the new plan, person coming into the school that's not liking coming into the school.
Mm-hmm.
Any kind of idea as to how you would get that person not to come into this, come into the school through some sort of, in other words, how would you know that that person is the person that is going to have a problem coming into the school? Is it somebody that has had problems coming into the school prior?
It's a student that struggles that we're aware of, but no, not necessarily. Is it a consistent pattern, number one?
So I guess, I'm sorry if I'm not making the question.
Okay.
The question is, you talk about being proactive instead of reactive.
Correct.
Right?
Right.
My question to you is, you gave us a bunch of reactive, or you gave me, us, a number of reactive situations. How do you stop the reactive situations and move into the proactive? In other words, what would be different about your day?
Building consistent relationships on a daily basis. So having those 5 days to be in the building consistently so that I'm able to build those supports, work with that student I know him.
So in theory, or based on some sort of precedent-setting situation, your being proactive is going to stop the reactive situation. Is that correct?
Yes, because my whole point is to be proactive in teaching him those coping skills so that when he does enter into those situations, I've had that consistent time and that consistent approach to be able to build that relationship and teach him those skills on a consistent basis. Right now, one time a week doesn't give him the opportunity to learn those skills.
Is it consistently the same person that causes the problem?
No. No.
So now, you're not talking about being proactive with that one person. You're talking about being proactive with potentially 20.
And that's where that green area of the triangle
or
comes
80.
from.
That classroom intervention, that's exactly it.
So part
Sure.
of our work moving forward is looking at what are some of those programs, there was a few outlined in that financial study that we're doing, the responsive classroom, second step is one of them. What are some of those tier 1 curriculum pieces that we can help support for all kids in classrooms? So we're being preventative for our high flyers, so to speak, but we're also being preventative at all the different.
I think there's 2 ways of thinking about the proactive piece. One is at the individual level, as you're talking about how are we proactive with a specific student, but also at a systems level. So by being proactive, by shifting here, by providing more tier 1 and tier 2 supports, we're proactive for kids as they develop and changing their trajectory of social emotional learning, so that when they get to this point, they have the skills to do their own coping, and we're seeing fewer situations where we have to be reactive. Now, it is the case that we are still going to see tier 3 needs, right? Like that, there are still going to be some tier 3 needs, but hopefully fewer of those because we've been able to be proactive. And then also we have the supports now to manage those tier 3 needs, as well as continuing to be proactive with our other needs. Because, for example, a social worker who is in Heather's situation wouldn't be pulled to another building to address, so that she's only able to focus on the tier 3 needs. Does that help make sense?
It does. I think it'd be better if there were 4 of you.
Well,
or 10 of you.
That would be great.
Give a claw machine somewhere?
I don't understand where you come up with where you determine, how many Band-Aids you're going to be using for this problem.
Well, certainly how we determine that with the increase of the, at the elementary level with the 3 additional social workers, that's in order to have a social worker in each of the elementary buildings. Right now, that is not the case.
What do you do when there's more than one kid at a time, if you have one social worker?
So that's true, but typically there is a team of folks on the social emotional, like mental health team that works together. And part of that team includes the principal.
But to answer your question, sometimes there are more than one student that's breaking down, and the social worker's in another building.
Right.
Dealing with.
Yeah, but I'm saying if you put a social worker in every building, will that be enough? Because what if there's more than one? So you're saying that
it's
the
better than
team.
what we have now.
So, yeah, it's better than what we have now. It also speaks to some of the coordinator roles. So I'm a psychologist 2 days a week, and then 3 days a week I work as a coordinator. And so, like, for example, I'll get a call when we have pretty detailed crisis plans for some of our kids that delineate exactly what procedures staff do, and I'm on that list, so it's not infrequent at all. Looking at the principal desk that I'm called out of my coordinator role to go do that crisis assessment because I have that. So there's right. So that's part of that.
But part of the proposal, Chrissy, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that we also are aware that this is kind of like the bare minimum that we can propose, while also recognizing the financial state that we're in. So certainly we would love to have even more support would help quite a bit, but this is kind of that balance of what's our foundational level.
That's exactly it, foundational level.
But also some of these kids that have been recognized, they also have one-on-ones too, right?
Not very often, no.
No? So you got no aides in there to help with some of these kids?
No.
None at all?
Well, you have to remember, They're not having the training that we have.
No, I'm not saying that, because, yeah, if they're instructional aides, they are. They're your extended.
Which are very
help.
skilled, but in a different way.
Exactly, so I'm saying they could also be help working with kids until you can get to them.
Just
while
like
you're
the
working with
principal
other
would,
kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of our children have it.
But they're
But I
not-
want to just
Yeah.
emphasize, though, we're not just talking, this is not about students with IEPs. This is a general ed population as well. And
Right.
so our general ed population.
No, they
do not
would not
have
have that.
IEPs, do not
Right,
have,
I understand
Which is
that.
honestly the majority of, right now, a lot of the time are the crisis intervention related to are the general ed students, unfortunately.
A new one.
Well, of
Yeah.
course.
That was a good question.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
I've got one. So if you had the people that you believe you need, is there any study or whatnot that you could cite that would say, if you have this level of staffing with this kind of expertise, after a year or two, whatever time interval that might be required, then the child is okay? Or is this an ongoing forever thing? I mean, it's like going to the doctor. You use the analogy of the primary care versus urgent care, right?
And the same applies, some diabetes is gonna be a lifelong thing that we're gonna have to, and some are.
So is there data that shows that if you put this kind of resource at this kind of a problem, that you end up with less of a problem, over a period of time?
Yeah, it would be,
Study that
it would
shows
be
that.
all of that social emotional study, all the stuff on CASL that would
Yeah, I
look
looked
at.
at some of that.
So that when they look at those resources, it is people, but also programs. And so that's part of our ongoing committee work as well, is looking at, yes.
Well, that's why I called it slippery last time, because it seems to me the 11-1 ratio is okay for a societal position, but that requires support from all across the community, not just from the public K-12 education. So that's what I'm wondering. I'd really like to know that there is going to be a return on investment more directly, not just this 11-1 with who knows whose money, at this 11-1 ratio, but that if District Court 28 puts in X money, well, so it's $1.2 million or so, something like that, right? I think 11 you requested. If you put in that money, that there will be an obvious and soon return, soon meaning in a year or two or something to that effect. Let's just say faster than the rate of change according to the growing population. If you can't hit that, if you can't exceed the rate of change or the rate of incoming kids, general population, and some of those who have these issues, right, then you'll always be needing more and more and more resources.
Okay, I would argue that right now, we're not at the norm, that we know that the K-5 building would typically either have a social worker or a counselor.
Yeah, but it's
Or
interesting.
or in some cases, both.
Sure, that's as we were talking before, the prototypical best, right? But how do we get to this place so quickly, right? I mean, I've been watching this district for at least 8 years now, right? And this is the first conversation that I've ever heard in my observation. I wasn't on the board in those days, but this is the first conversation I've heard in general about a crisis, about a need for $1 million or more worth of additional support for this purpose. I'd never heard it before.
It's changing everywhere, Kerry.
Oh, I know it's changing everywhere, but I'm saying, that's why I'm asking about the data, because the rate of change appears to be, now I don't have a curve here to look at, right? Not much of one. Just some intuitive things having watched. But
It was up there.
Hearing, this
No.
is the first time you're hearing that there was a need for this? Is that what
at
you're
this
saying?
level, yes.
I mean, I've been in this district for 8 years and this has been the
You know, I
case.
sat on FFAC for
Okay,
years.
but did you sit in the
and
classroom? But did you sit in the building? Did
Yeah,
you
but
go?
this is high, the board is high level, Bill.
That's anecdotal.
It's
No,
supposed
it's
to
not
be high
anecdotal.
level.
It's not
In a classroom, it's anecdotal.
Can I interject something? Regardless of how we got there, or how we got here, we're here. And
But it projects.
maybe Carrie, and I can't speak of discussions that have happened before July 1 this year. Maybe we haven't kept up with the change in our student. I mean, we saw that in statistics, how the demographic, the socioeconomic demographic has changed. And I said this last time, it's not causation, but there's a strong correlation. And where we're at today, if we don't make some steps to start to address this today, then we'll be back here next year and the year after,
well,
having the same conversation.
Thanks for putting it up, Christie. I mean, the changes or the difference in the slope of the two lines tells you the problem that we have. And I'm saying I'd see a third line. This is all intuitive. I don't have data. It's or anecdotal, but I see a third line, and that would be, an enormous increase in slope exponential toward the end of the lower curve there. Because as I said, this is the first request board that I can remember has had in 8 or so years for a very significant change in resource. Yes, there have been incremental 1s and 2s here and there for a while, but this is quite different from the previous request. And it would beg the question that curve is about to take off like a rocket ship. And it will, I'll guarantee it will, if the proactive stance doesn't work. Then it definitely will take off like a rocket, unless we somehow lose the population, that is low income and more often comes with these social emotional issues.
Great, let's move on. We've got
Okay.
UT coming up later in the agenda, and I think at that point we
You
can
can
talk
pass
about
the second page.
how we'll go forward with that.
Thank you very much.
More so, thank you, ladies.
Thank you. Right, next we have the non-business consent agenda. That the board, and this is an action item, that the Board of Education approve the non-business consent agenda items A through F.
So moved. Second.
Right, any discussion? Right, roll call please.
Fred Davis,
Yes.
Jeff Alvin,
Yes.
Mary Millette,
Yes.
Victoria Newport,
Yes.
Valerie Pinda Hernandez,
Yes.
Rick Smith.
Yes.
Next we have business consent agenda. This is an action item. That the Board of Education approve the business consent agenda items A through D. Do we have a motion?
Second.
Discussion? Right, roll call please.
Jeff Alvin,
Yes.
Mary Millette,
Yes.
Victoria Newport,
Yes.
Valerie Pinda Hernandez,
Yes.
Rick Smith,
Yes.
Fred Davis.
Yes.
Next, we have the 2018-2019 position FTE increase requests. This is an action item that the Board of Education approve the position increase request as identified on the attached summary.
We have some discussion.
Yes, but let's get a motion in a second. I guess let's do discussion in case we're not going to adjust. Okay.
First of all, speaking for myself, I understand the need for additional FTE. I also understand that we have to have some type of accountability and some kind of ledger mentality when we add. One area we have to look at cost savings in other areas. And so my suggestion, what I would propose is to add 3 positions at this time. And I'd like to kick it back to Jamie and his admin team to look at ways that we could identify cost savings as a result of adding 3 FTE. So, I recognize the need. So we're looking at, when I say 3, I mean 3 in addition to the 8 that we asked for. So I'm talking about adding a total of 11. So, I think we have to be cautious, and we can't, I don't think it's the right thing, financially to add the full amount at this time. I think you can add, for me, I think you can add somewhere, sort of meet in the middle. And for me, that means adding the 8 that we budgeted, plan to add, and then do go ahead and add more staff in consideration with the presentations that we've had over the past couple of board meetings and the need for that, to add 3 more people.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I have a real problem with this whole thing. I mean, I understand that there's a need. I don't think I understand it well enough yet, and I certainly don't understand the actual cost and how it will be applied as to resources. I think I get the principle of the thing. But I'm not ready to vote on this. In particular, I want to see the results of our residency check. I don't want to hire new people until I know how many students we're going to have. And then, of course, there'll have to be a breakout of, among those students, which ones will need special interventions versus ones that don't. But then I can know a better idea of how many people we actually need. If you made the assumption that there will be no change in the student population, then you could perhaps, based on this presentation, if you believe it all, make a vote. But right now, I'm on shifting sand. As far as the numbers go, I don't see how I can possibly vote in an educated sense.
Victoria, Cindy, this is a question for you. We talked earlier, there was some numbers on there on people that are looking to retire. So I think this end of the school year is going to be 5 people, right?
Yes.
So this, actually, I like Rick's plan, and so I would support what he just said. So with the 5, let's say it's 11 people. So would that include those 5 people? I mean, you know what I'm saying? Could those 5 people, are they part of this 11?
Well,
Is that confusing?
No, I understand. The projections already have taken into consideration those 5 people leaving and then replacing them with 5 new people.
Which would be a lesser pay.
Yes, so that's already incorporated within the projection. So the savings of that, I guess you can say, is already incorporated. On top of and then within there is the additional 8.
So really, hold on a minute, please, thanks. So really, we would just be adding, would we be adding only 6 more people? Or would it be 11?
It would be 11.
11 total.
It would be 11 new, because basically the 5 are getting replaced by
They'll be replaced obviously with the lower
Exactly,
pay.
right.
And we
So-
can kind of help offset some costs with that money, can we?
Well, that's already incorporated in.
Oh,
there.
okay, all right, yeah.
Yes.
Well, I suggested you look for ways, ask Jamie and his team to look for ways they can anticipate cost savings. And I mean, either through, flat out cost savings or through additional revenue. I mean, there could be, revenue that we're not penciling in the budget at this point, that we could look at helping offset the cost.
Do we get any reimbursement? I mean, I'm reading on some of this stuff here for some of the stuff you put up. Do we get reimbursement costs on special ed?
For,
Like with,
private tuition, so basically we have outplaced students, we get some reimbursement from that. The evidence-based funding model, like we have shown, the personnel reimbursement, the way it used to be is that we did get separate dollars for personnel reimbursement for special education. Now that is lumped together in the new evidence-based funding model. So, because part of that model and how they're calculating it includes children with IEPs. So it's taken into consideration the enrollment and that piece of the enrollment, so that gets included there. So now it's a different type of philosophy. Before it was just direct. You would basically report to the state how much you're spending on special education teachers, special education assistants, those types of things, and then we receive reimbursement. Not 100%, but we receive some money back from the state to help cover some of those costs.
Okay.
Now that's all inclusive within that whole formula.
Okay.
But we do get separate reimbursement for private place students for their tuition.
So we had 8 projected. We've had it, it's up in front of all of us, 8 people
Yeah.
as part of our budget.
Yeah.
What are we allocating those 8 people for? I mean, we have done this before. We had this particular discussion and had this particular need come before us. What are those 8 people for? Why 8? Or what would we typically do with those 8 allocations?
It depends on year to year what the needs of the students. In the prior year, we had a lot of shifting. I think at least 5 of those went to elementaries because we had some new classrooms.
So when Christy comes before us and says, I need a half FTE or I need a 1 FTE, are we taking it out of that 8 allocated? Or no? Is that?
No, those were above and beyond, like when those were coming through throughout the year. Those were above and
So
beyond.
in other words, what we do is we build in an 8 a buffer. This is an 8, we may need these 8, someone for the 8.
Yep.
am I hearing this correctly, that we're gonna be using up all 8 of them on this particular issue? Plus 3.
Plus 3.
Plus 3, and what?
And some are at the high school.
Right, so at this point, we don't have a buffer.
The 8, no.
And
No,
we,
this is
and we
beyond the
typically
8.
need that 8. I mean, apparently we've used the 8 in every one of the preceding years. So now, we're not only talking about the 8 that we have, that we're using up for this particular project, but we're also going to be using it up theoretically, or at least typically, we use it up on some other people that we need. Yes.
My understanding is that the 8 from year to year was not utilized as throughout the year, but rather to move with growth as the district grows. So 8 built in for projections of growth for the district in need, not to support additional one-off needs needed throughout the year. So I think they're 2 separate things, the way I understand it.
I understand that, but we still use it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Every year.
We still use the 8. I mean, it's not like that 8 is, oh, let's use that 8 for this, and then we don't need that for the 8 that we were going to be.
What I understand is that they're intended at the beginning of the year, not as, to be held for, as things come up throughout the year. Right, proactively at the beginning of the year as we grow.
Well, nevertheless, it's still, whatever semantics we use on it, it's still an allocation that we have typically used that allocation, and if we take it for this, we no longer have that allocation, right? I mean, we would not use it for what we have typically used it for in the last.
Right, so anything, basically, you use your 8 plus 3. Well, already the 3 is over the budgeted amount.
And the 8 is basically something that
The
we're
8
taking
is,
from our bank.
yeah, so you budgeted the 8, whether that lasts you all year or not, I don't know, it just depends on the need, right? But then, so what happens is you budgeted for the 8. Now I'm saying, we should allow them to have 3 more to put in social workers on top of the 8, put in social workers in schools, right? So then your question is, okay, since we normally use 8 every year, and we're saying we're going to use 8 for the social program plus 3, where is the additional 8 throughout the year that we normally use going to come from? Is that what your question is?
We've just gotten rid of our bank.
So
gotten rid of our bank.
that's what his question is. Are we?
Part of this is, how many more kindergartners do you want us to try to pack in a room? We're already at 27. And how many, we have class sizes at the high school that are well into the 30s.
I'm not suggesting we get rid of the bank. I'm just saying we're using up.
We're using it, Jeff, as the enrollment continues to grow. There are districts around us that they're in another situation. As their enrollments are declining, they're having to reduce staff to match, the decline of their enrollment. Unfortunately, we're in a position where we're stable or growing, so we have to match that as well. Otherwise, we have 38, 40 in a high school history class, and we have 28, 29, and we also have other areas, special education, where there are mandated caps on class sizes that we have to add FTE to match those as well.
I simply was pointing out the obvious, that when we use up our bank, we're using it up for this. This is not like something that isn't going to be needed. We're going to need it. When we have it.
If it holds true to every other year so far, then we'll need that buffer that
we'll need that.
And here's what I don't get. Why are we even talking about this until after the residency thing is over with?
And I'll say, if we wait until after all of that's done, we're going to be trying to hire staff in July, and they're not going to be there.
Oh, it'll be hard to rip people if we have to. I mean, it's one or the other.
Well, certainly.
I think also to talk about the vetting thing, maybe it's like this. Say in one scenario, I'm gonna throw a number out there, a bunch of kids are taken out of the system. I don't think it's gonna be enough where we're gonna lose any teachers. I think probably what you're gonna end up with a smaller classroom size. That, you know what I'm
Big
saying?
assumption so far.
But here's the other thing that we're not talking about, right? Is that the fact of the matter is, the educational quality now is what everyone's talking about. So you have, no, hang on. Dollars is one thing, okay? As a school board, we're all expected to represent different aspects of the community. Dollars is one thing, not the only thing, right? That's one thing. What should be our focus here is what's the educational, right? How are we able to provide the kids? So when you look at that in a bigger picture, Carrie, all I'm suggesting is if we sit here and say, oh, we can't add 3, 4 people, right? What you're doing is you're acknowledging the fact that you're choosing to do nothing about the problems that everybody here has said is happening now. And the cost, the real cost is going to be, as I talked about in the last meeting, the real cost is going to be exacerbated by sending kids outside of our control and paying that $32,000. What was the number?
That's a fallacy.
Well, our portion.
It's not a fallacy.
Yes.
It was a
Yes.
Our portion is 24, and then we pay a prorated portion after, above and beyond the 24,000 per student.
So you're paying that number. And if you don't start taking action now, trying to help people as they're younger, as our population grows, that number, you can only expect that to grow, and that's the cost.
Well, for me, Rick, I mean, I see the emotional and the compassionate side of this thing to some degree. What I also see is that as the tax rates continue to go up, as they've been going up for quite some time now, DeKalb now pays, the city of DeKalb, pays some of the highest property taxes in Illinois, and people are leaving. And as more and more of those people leave, the ones that can, and the ones that can leave are the ones that can afford to leave, right? They're the ones that you'd like to keep, and that we need to grow. As those people leave, then our EAP base will collapse because no one will want to buy those high-end homes that are now on the market. Well, and so on. I could go on.
What about the kids that are going to school now?
You've said that several times already, where the people that we can't.
Okay, nobody wants to believe me, but it will happen.
No, Carrie, can you just listen? You've had your chance to talk. I haven't spoken a lot tonight.
Let's hear it.
You're talking about residency. We had no evidence, I had no evidence presented before me that we had an issue with residency. But yet we're here talking about this still, right? And this is something that we're exploring. We don't have the money to look at that, but yet we did on a gut feeling. We have individuals who we've hired to present tonight, who are individuals, are professionals in this area. You stated you don't go to the schools, you don't know the problems that exist within the schools. There's a so-called crisis that I don't think you are understanding the capacity in which these teachers have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And you're questioning it, and I get that you worry about finances, but Carrie Merlot is the Board of Education member, not just finances. If you want finances, then maybe Cindy Carpenter's job is your interest. But I'm looking at the whole picture here. Yes, $1.2 million is a lot of money. I'm not saying give it all, do what they're asking, but it's looking at it and not saying no without first considering what will happen if we don't say yes to something.
Well, and I guess what I would like to maybe, with your 11, I could agree to 11 if in that 11 was the 5 social workers. And that would have to be how I would support it. I like the 11.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So how are you going to
Definitely agree with that.
I mean, I think the social workers are very high here on what we.
And though I think we should also ask Jimmy and his team to look at on the leisure side of things, how, just like we were talking about the other issues, how then can we recoup some of these costs? Is it through cost savings or is it through additional revenue that we can experience? Like,
Then you got a magic pen over there.
get out the magic.
Jump in here for just a second. I want to address something that Carrie brought up earlier, which is, and it's something that I feel strongly about. You've spoken about it as well. The number that has dramatically risen is our out of district that we sent, where we send people out of district at a great deal of expense. Now that has gone up pretty exponentially. It's just like skyrocketing. I feel that in keeping with what you were talking about, is we haven't really talked about measuring success here. We've talked about needs, we've talked about wants and feelings, and we think that this number of people is going to do better than that. I mean, so I wasn't being facetious when I said 4 would be better than 2. I mean, it would be good to have 6 people in one of our classes, given the number of difficulties that we have. But it seems to me that we haven't been talking here about measuring success, and that means lowering the number of incidents, doing something that tells me that or tells us who are funding this, or that we're doing, that we're having success. Right now, you're telling us about failure and potential, or where we're failing, where we're not succeeding, and then you say, okay, here's this strange pyramidal shape that tells us, what we're going to do. To me, it doesn't define. I would like to see some sort of measure of success. I would like to say, have we reduced the number of incidents? By putting one person in there, have we changed the dynamic at all?
Here's one measure, okay? We went to all-day kindergarten 5 years ago or so. There are some measures already, and we still have significant issues, right? And they're growing. These issues are getting more and more difficult all the time. So there's one measure.
I'd like to make an amended motion here, and that motion would be that we approve 11 new FTEs for fiscal year 2018-19. 5 of them have to be for social workers, and that we'll ask the superintendent to look at reductions in costs.
To add the other, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
To add the others, or to
Well,
reduction in cost in general to
just look at costs in general and see what they can find.
Will that include a reduction in programs possibly?
Well, we'll have to see what they come up with. I mean, they have to see where we can draw costs. Of course, that's one of.
You have to look at everything, really.
So again,
It's like the other.
so
in terms of, like you mentioned.
there's a motion and.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So does everybody understand the motion that we give 11 FTEs for the 2018-19 school year? 5 of them have to be social workers. And then we'd ask the superintendent to look at possible cost cuts in other areas.
Or additional revenue.
Additional revenue.
According to.
Okay, but so now the motion's on the table, so we need a,
that's just enough. I guess we vote right now.
Yeah.
so
So I'll second the motion.
roll call, please.
Karen Millette,
Abstain.
Victoria Newport,
Yes.
Valerie Penny Hernandez,
Yes.
Craig Smith,
Yes.
Fred Davis,
Yes.
Abstain. You call my name?
Okay, next we have the Dekalb High School marching band uniform bid and funding approval. And this is an action item, that the Board of Education award the marching band uniform bid for $73,815.50 to the Bandman's Company, 1304 Enterprise Drive, Williamsville, Illinois, and approve funding in the amount of $12,000 paid out of the district budget with an additional $24,907.75 in funds approved in a loan to be paid back over 5 years.
So.
Second.
Oh, wait, what?
We have our amendment here. That the Board of Education award the marching band uniform bid of $73,815.50 to the Bandman's Company, 1304 Enterprise Drive, Romeoville, Illinois, and approve funding as follows. $36,907.75 funded by music/band boosters and fundraising. $12,000 funded up from the district funding. The remaining balance of $24,907.75 will be funded with $10,000 from the district music budget at $1,000 per year over the next 10 years or sooner, and $15,000 from the band course fee account at $1,500 per year over the next 10 years or sooner.
And so this is how they would pay back to us. So same numbers.
And then,
No, we need a second. We need a second.
I'm second.
Okay, no discussion.
Yeah, I do have a question. So, and I obviously wasn't here at the last board meeting, so I do have questions. For football, for other sports, how is this funded? Do we expect them to pay back as well?
Currently, athletic uniforms, we check on this, are paid for by the booster club.
By the
Athletic booster club.
Okay, so the district never has to pay out of the district's money for uniforms for the athletic department. Is that what I'm understanding?
We do for safety, don't we?
Do we pay for uniforms?
Yeah, I looked at, since 2004 and looked for any uniform expenses, and there was maybe just a couple $100 here and there maybe for replacement uniforms, but nothing significant to pay for.
That topic came up several times in discussion when you were here, is related to it setting a precedent.
And I watched the video. I still wanted to confirm because Howard
Yeah.
reached out to me and asked me, and I'm like, I thought that was clear. I thought maybe there was something I had missed, I had not understood. I mean, I'm in full support. I almost feel like the music department, always, I mean, from my experience, they're always out there fundraising in many ways. So for us to help them in any way possible, I think it's admirable. And the fact that, they're given that opportunity is great.
You saw the video, uniforms, the new uniforms are very nice.
Oh, yeah, they're awesome.
And they also are, they can wash them as opposed
they're
to.
Yeah.
Do you know what the cost per student is for athletics versus the? No. Because it's about, I think, 500 something, or about 500-600 for the band uniforms. I'm just wondering if the other athletic program uniforms are in the same ballpark or not.
Well, it's gonna vary.
Yeah.
From sport to sport, cross
You know,
country.
basketball is a lot like.
Steve, do you know the answer to that question?
Well, I was at the athletic booster meeting when I requested some funds from them back in the fall. And those vary really, really widely. Mr. Cooper told me that football is far and away the most expensive in the uniform setup, and they have essentially, a rolling calendar of when people get new uniforms. The big difference is that the band uniform is supposed to be a minimum 10-year purchase, and the athletic uniforms are not really designed to go much past, like 5 would be a ton. The same uniform for a sport.
Okay, so roll call then?
Howard Payne Hernandez.
Yes.
Craig Smith.
Yes.
Fred Davis.
Yes.
Jeff Palmer.
Yes.
Karen Malak.
Yes.
Victoria Newport.
Yes. So, go in order.
Thank you so much. They look great.
Yes, they do.
And thank you for your letter. It's very well written.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Okay, next we have business and finance, requested in paper and office and miscellaneous supplies, and this is an informational item.
Every year we come to the board to ask to bid our paper and office supplies. So again, this is an annual process. We like to look at the best price each year so we can get the best bang for our dollars. So we just want to start that process now, and then we'll bring it back to the board for approval to go up to do a request for proposal. And then we'll start that process, and typically in May is when we come back with those results to find the vendor that we will use for the next upcoming school year.
Next we have new business and administration, summer school driver education FTE increase, and this is an informational item.
Yeah, good evening. So last year about this time, Mark Sykes and Brad Hawk put together a joint presentation requesting an additional FTE in the summertime for driver ed. The reason why we do that in the summertime is it opens up opportunities for freshmen to get a head start, especially for the early birthday. We ran that, it gives 20 additional students the opportunity to take driver ed over the summertime. Our freshman class, what we call the high school now, we are rising juniors, we're up about 10 students. So we do have that need. So at this time I have requested that we add in the summertime the additional FTE for driver education.
This is informational, right?
Informational. So my request is to bring it back as an action item.
James, does this FTE come out of an existing staff member, or is this what a new hire, or how's that work?
This does eases the tension during the school year for driver ed. Driver ed is a graduation requirement. It is something that students have to take. On the road is really where the rubber hits the road, for lack of a better term here, because that's how kids get driver licenses. We have only a certain amount of spots that we have available with FTE. The unknown variable during the school year is how many kids take it through a private provider. But what you don't want to do is tell parents you have to go to a private provider if you want to take it during their sophomore year. So what this does is actually opens up more opportunity for kids to take it during their sophomore year, because if they're not taking it during their sophomore year, they wind up taking it during the junior year.
But would this FTE be filled by an existing staff member, or would this be someone that has to be brought in new?
It is summertime, so all summertime are higher, so it'd be a new hire in the summertime. But it's the exact same as it was last summer.
So do we want to bring this back to an action item?
James there, like, well, help me.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have facility operations summer staffing request, and this is an informational item.
Each year I come back as we're preparing for summer cleaning, summer projects, and other maintenance and grounds items, and request to add additional temporary staff over the summer. Over the past few years, we have adjusted that we do not hire just full-time staff of 40 hours a week. We hire combinations of 20 and 40-hour week staff members for temporary. So what I'm requesting is basically to hire the same dollar amount that was approved last year with a small increase, because we do have 2 union positions that we'll have a reduction in force due to the NIU contract at Huntley. So that's 2 less bodies on my team in the summer ultimately. So we would be looking to hire a couple other summer staff versus off of our union.
Questions for Tammy?
I'm curious, we're losing the NIU theater production at Huntley?
This was the intent, is that they were leasing our Huntley Auditorium while the Stevens Building was under construction.
And it is currently now finished?
It is nearing completion, and we have been informed they will be vacating as of the end of their lease agreement, which is June 30th.
Oh, how lovely. That's great.
Okay.
At long last.
Tammy, is this, I'm reading the note here, which I've read before. But I'm reading the note here that said these funds are already factored into the budget? Okay. So we're not approving additional funds. Aren't you the one?
Last one of the night.
All right.
That's terrific. Thank you so much.
You want to bring this back as an action item?
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much.
All right. Next is adjournment. The meeting will be adjourned. All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Aye.